tracking down Marilyn Monroe's real size. From Roseanne Barr stating, "I'm more sexy than Pamela Lee or whoever else they've got out there these days. Marilyn Monroe was a size 16. That says it all." To Elizabeth Hurley stating, "I've always thought Marilyn Monroe looked fabulous, but I'd kill myself if I was that fat." You'll often hear people saying Marilyn Monroe was around the same size as the average American woman today, 12 to 16. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth, at least by today's sizing systems. How this myth got started isn't exactly known. One possible contributing factor to this myth was Marilyn Monroe's rare, extreme hourglass shape. More directly, it probably partly stems from the fact that women's sizes today are not at all equivalent to women's sizes in the 1950s. In the 1980s, in order to accommodate people's vanity and ever-expanding girth, the US Department of Commerce got rid of the uniform sizing system and instead allowed for more ego-stroking sizes. As a result of this, today, a size 8 would have been roughly equivalent to a size 16 to 18 in the 1950s. Obviously, though, this varies a shocking amount from brand to brand. So, what size was Marilyn Monroe really? Luckily, many of her dresses, carefully preserved, are still around to measure off of. Further, one of her dressmakers also chimed in with the exact measurements he took. These measurements were 5 foot 5.5 inches tall, 35-inch bust, 22-inch waist, and 35-inch hips with a bra size of 36D. Her weight fluctuated a bit through her career, usually rising in times of depression and falling back to a normal thereafter, but her dressmaker listed her as 118 pounds, and the Hollywood studios tended to list her between 115 and 120 pounds. As to what size Marilyn Monroe would be in women's sizes today, that's not an easy thing to answer due to the differing sizes from brand to brand, country to country, and the fact that her extreme hourglass shape would have made it difficult for her to find the perfect size while clothes shopping. Luckily for her, she could afford to have her clothing custom made, which she usually did. As a direct example of her size, the white dress she wore in the 7-Year Itch was recently auctioned off and was put on a mannequin that was a size 2, but they were still unable to zip up the dress as the mannequin was too big. Many of her other dresses that exist from throughout her career match up to about the same, give or take an inch or two. That being said, Marilyn Monroe at times would have her dresses so tight they'd have to be sewn onto her, so something more comfortable in a size 4-ish American and something like an 8 in the UK is probably more accurate with many brands. If you're curious as to how that compares to modern contemporary fashion models, according to Blue Fire Model Registry, models are generally in the vicinity of a 34-inch bust, 24-inch waist, and 34-inch hips, which is very close to Monroe's measurements of 35, 22, 35. They also list the average model today at 5 foot 8 inches to Monroe's 5 foot 5.5 inches. Elizabeth Hurley, who in the above quote called Marilyn Monroe fat, actually has around the same dimensions, 34, 24, 34, though is about 5 inches taller than Monroe was. So while it's often rightly lamented that female models and actresses today set a standard that few can realistically live up to, the same was true in the Marilyn Monroe era, minus Photoshop, even though she's often used today as an example of how things were different back in the day. Probably the perception of the difference between then and now lies more in the fact that the average American is a lot bigger today. To this point, the average American woman in the late 1950s had a 25-inch waist compared to Marilyn Monroe's 22 inches, whereas today the average American woman has a waist size of 34 inches, so the gap between the models and average was much less pronounced then. And of course, today we have more advanced means of photo and video editing to make the gap seem even larger, with the edited results being truly unattainable, even by the models and actresses themselves. Bonus fact: another Marilyn Monroe myth was that she was a blonde. In fact, the actress, famed for her platinum blonde curls, was actually a dark-haired brunette. She first dyed her hair blonde after being told that models with lighter-colored hair were preferable, so bleached it to golden blonde, and later adjusted this a total of 9 times until she settled on platinum blonde. So I really hope you liked that video, and if you did like it, click like below and leave us a comment to let us know what you think. And also check out a couple of our other videos, which are linked to on the screen now, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos every day. Thanks for watching.